we'd like to call the meeting to order. The next item on the agenda is adoption of the agenda. Everybody good with the agenda? We'll move forward. Before we get started, the next thing, citizens time, before we get started with that, Mr. Bailey called me last night. He has a medical procedure, so he's having to do that today. He said he's fine, he's feeling good. It just conflicted with the meeting schedule. And Addie's not going to be with us today. She's got COVID, so
She's coming out of it, 14 days. I went by to see her. And she's doing good, but I said, don't risk coming up here. Put anybody else at risk here. She said she's got it.
and Jason and Al both work. They have conflicting schedules today, so they're not present because of that. And the others that are not here, I haven't heard from, so that's the status of the notice. So right now, we're opening up citizens' time. Is there anyone here who'd like to speak to citizens' time? Seeing none, we'll move forward. Next item is approval of the minutes. Does anybody want to make a motion for approval?
I'm ready. Second.
We have a motion, a second. Call for the vote. Everybody in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. And for the new business, we have 3 presentations today, and I'll just call them as we move forward. The first on the list is the Home Building Association of Richmond. And we have Elizabeth Hancock Greenfield speaking today. And I just want to, after she finishes the presentation, we'll go around the room in a order like we did last time to ask questions. But keep in mind, Ms. Hancock has got a tight schedule today, and she needs to get out.
Translation is a question quota, right?
What's that?
That's a question quota.
Yeah. Well, she knows when she has to leave, so I'll let her determine how long she can stay.
Yeah, we'll give a little bit of an intro to, we just finished land use, economic development, and historic resources, the first round of topic areas. We'll be, of course, revisiting those, but now we're moving into housing, active living, and the rural chapter. So we wanted to give you all some information on housing trends, what's going on in the housing market in Hanover, so that as we move forward and start making recommendations, you'll have some background on that. So we do have some experts that do a lot of work in the housing field, both in Hanover County and the region overall. So that's the main focus of today.
Thank you, Mr. Pompey. So I guess we're ready for our first speaker list.
Did we decide on putting this on?
You can leave it on the table.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me and inviting me to speak to the community team. I'm Elizabeth Greenfield with the Home Building Association of Richmond. We represent developers, home builders, engineers, architects, and a variety of other industries that work with the home building and land development industry. We have a number of our members that live and work in Hanover County that I'm sure you're familiar with and have projects here. And later in my presentation, I'm even going to show you some numbers from some of the actual project here in Hanover County. So I wanted to, this might be old news for some of you, but I just wanted to give you kind of a landscape of what's happening with housing. These are statewide statistics. This is from the statewide housing study that the General Assembly asked the Department of Housing and Community Development, or DHCD, and Virginia Housing Development Authority, which, what are they called now? Housing Virginia? Virginia Housing. To spearhead, to look at housing, particularly affordable housing across the Commonwealth. And one thing that I've learned quickly from coming to the home builders in the last 2.5 years is that housing production has not recovered from the pre-recession levels. I know that seems hard to believe because we see a lot of new homes coming up in the pipeline, but we are actually not building the number of units that we were pre-recession. At the same time, our population growth is continuing to grow, but housing's not keeping up with that. And you'll see here that our population has grown 10.2% since the recession, but the housing supply has only expanded a little over 8.5%. So about 30,000 new homes are built in Virginia each year, and this is about half the rate from the mid-2000s. And keep in mind, I'm giving you statewide figures. Annual number of building permits, which is kind of a proxy for measuring how many new homes are coming on the ground, has dropped 47% from 2004 to 2020. And again, this entire time, our statewide population growth is continuing to grow. So the message here is that this is not a Hanover problem, this is across the Commonwealth, that our population is growing and we're not building the units that we once were or keeping up with that population growth. And I talk to folks in other jurisdictions that say, well, I see all these units coming on the ground and there's so much construction activity. And I said, well, yeah, some of those might have been rezoned and in the pipeline when the recession hit and folks hit pause, or just the market wasn't ready and now you're seeing them kind of come out of the ground. So it can be a little misleading, but overall, we're not keeping up with population growth. So a little bit of a snapshot of the I'm sorry, Randy, yes.
Go ahead, wait. I'll finish that.
You sure? Okay. A quick snapshot of single-family activity in Hanover County, and unfortunately, I didn't have access to fourth quarter statistics for 2022, so this is or for 2020, third quarter 2022, but you will see that we've seen a slight decrease in home closings from third quarter of 2021. Same with lot closings. But yet our prices on the new home construction side is continuing to grow, as well as the price of average lots. So even though we're seeing a tiny little bit of a slowdown from 2021 to 2022, our prices are still continuing to rise, and I'm going to address why as we move forward. So there's some challenges impacting the industry, and this is why you're starting to see some of these prices rise. We have a very limited pipeline of developed or buildable lots. This is region-wide. We have a labor shortage. Material costs are continuing to rise. We also still have some material delays that are impacting production and costs. Restrictive zoning, regulatory costs, and again, I don't want anything in here to come off where it seems like I'm pinpointing just Hanover. Regulatory costs come from the federal, the state, and the local level. That's not just a Hanover-specific issue. But on average, 25% of the cost of a new construction single-family home is a regulatory cost. Timing and predictability. It can take 1 to 2 years to get land rezoned through the entitlement process and before the builder is actually building. Meanwhile, they're paying taxes on land that's not producing any type of income. The banks, are charging interest, so it's a very expensive process to go through and develop land. And then we all know there's a lot of public opposition to new development, particularly in rural areas where you're growing, but you really want to preserve that rural character and have to find a way to find that balance. So these are the challenges that our industry is facing. But to the previous slide where I showed that we are seeing an increase in home prices, a lot of that is rising material cost, rising cost of land, and then obviously we have interest rates that are rising. So even people's buying, as the prices are continuing, people's buying power in some cases is diminishing. So I mentioned that I was going to show you some Hanover-specific cases. I don't know these by name, and that's good because I don't want to call out any particular developer. But I was asked kind of why our industry is not putting single-family units on the ground around the 250, 300,000 figure. And this is why. It is very expensive to develop land. And I wanted to start, so we'll start on my right, I guess your left, a project at 3 units per acre. And you'll see here that the land cost per unit's around $26,000. Development cost, which includes, your engineering, your roads, your utilities, landscaping, signage, all of that, around 62, and then you get to your soft cost, which also include financing, development fees, real estate taxes. So just to develop a project at 3 units per acre, you're coming out at $95,000. That's just the development side. So keep in mind that there's building costs once you move from developing that land and you're building the unit. And so on average per unit, you're probably looking at another $25,000, $30,000 in a cash proffer / road proffer if it applies. Doesn't apply to all cases. Your water sewer hookup fees, your building permit fees. So at 3 units per acre, you can add on maybe another $30,000, $60,000, $90,000 to that for those 3 units. That's before you put the first brick in the ground, stick in the ground. This is why our industry is having a challenge of putting something on the ground that is at that $250,000, $300,000 range on single family. The next case over, I know it doesn't look like a huge difference. You're still, about $1,000 off in the grand total, but this was interesting to point out. The development costs are lower here because there was no proffered conditions attached to this case. So that's why you see the difference between 45 and 62. And the point that I want to drive home on the 11 units per acre, these are condos, and you'll see that those 11 units, just on the development side, it's about $45,000. This is what happens when you build a denser project. You're able to, the denser you're building and the more condensed you're putting those units together, you're able to bring that land development cost down and ultimately affect the overall price of the home. So solutions. You can look at more flexible zoning, whether that is increased density, where density is appropriate, where the infrastructure can handle it. Other localities, look at reduced setbacks, or they don't have certain height restrictions. Some of these may not apply to the type of development that you see in Hanover, but when I say more flexible zoning, it's offering the opportunity to put more units on the ground in a denser fashion where utilities are there and you're going to put less burden on your overall infrastructure. Increase the variety of development allowed by right. And I know some folks, don't like this. It's not an opportunity to bypass the public process, but as I mentioned, going through the entitlement process can take a year, 2 years. That's not only expensive and time consuming, it's unpredictable. And just, a typical rezoning, and I found this from the JLARC report, the Joint Legislative Audit and Review Commission that also looked at housing affordability, showed that on average a rezoning cost per case can be anywhere between $250,000 to $1 million just to go through the rezoning. So if you have more by right options where you're identifying where you want to see new development that can go through by right, that does help on the cost end. Reduced fees. I talked about fees with new development on the building side. There's a lot of things that local governments can't control when it comes to new construction costs. You can't control the price of land or the price of building materials, but some localities will look at reduced fees, whether it's building permit fees or any other fee that might encourage to say, well, we can build an extra 10% of units if we can have a fee reduction here. I mean, it's kind of a give and take, and it really depends on what the county is willing to put up on the front end to maybe get some more affordable units in on the back end. And other localities have looked at expedited review and approval process, particularly for infill projects. Again, it might be a smaller project where you're building where the infrastructure is there, and you're not having to think about putting in new roads or expanding schools. So that's just an option that's been used in other localities. So I'm switching gears here because staff asked me to talk a little bit about what consumers are looking for in new construction. And we hear all the time that low maintenance or maintenance-free living is incredibly popular across many demographics. You see a lot of aging retirees no longer wanting to cut grass or maintain a large single-family home and all that comes with it. Even younger folks who busy with families, they want less maintenance, and a lot of that comes with some of our townhome condo communities and through the HOAs. Outdoor gathering spaces have become hugely popular, and I'm going to show you some really neat pictures of what some of our builders have done in other communities. Particularly in light of COVID, people want to be able to get outside. They want some shared use spaces and amenities, whether it's a pickleball court, it's walkability with trails coming through and walkways coming through their neighborhood, or even some community spaces where folks can gather outdoors. I talked to a couple of our builders who said, we don't really see the requests for the traditional clubhouses anymore because people truly want to get outside. And dog parks is very, very popular. You're starting to see a lot of communities with dog parks. So here's an example. This is River Mill by H.H. Hunt. This is an amphitheater where they have Friday night movies. They have a concert series. This is the kind of outdoor activity that folks have started to gravitate to, particularly in light of COVID, where it's a shared community space, but they can be outdoors. This is also an H.H. Hunt project, and I show this because, and I actually made this a clickable link, and I just realized that I have no way I think of clicking it. But this is their clubhouse, and it doesn't look like what you think a clubhouse would look like. Inside, it's got a small kitchenette, but it's a shared use space for folks that work from home can come in and work here. So we're even rethinking the type of clubhouses that we're starting to see in communities. Folks can, have a barbecue here in the community. There's fire pits around, which you can't see, but when you go inside, it's set up like a shared community workspace, like a co-working gather type of thing. I know that there's been an interest in agri communities, and unfortunately I didn't get a lot of, that's something new that our industry is doing and that our industry is starting to explore. I know there's an agri community here in Hanover, but outside of that I didn't really have a lot of, data to bring you to say that that's a really increasing trend. I think it's very demographic for folks that maybe have more time to invest in agricultural community living. You're not a lot of young folks who are on the go a little bit more that want to farm in their free time. They want to go out and enjoy the fire pits and the Friday night movies like you saw with River Mill. But it is something that folks are looking at as an amenity. But overall, we're starting to see more shared amenities. So I'm not going to get into housing type trends because those seem to be changing daily. But in terms of amenities, I wanted to give you an idea of what folks want to see in their communities. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. I know that Randy's already got one, Mr. Whitaker. We're going to do a round robin. But thank you for the opportunity to present and tell you a little bit about what's happening with our industry.
We'll start on this side, okay?
Talk here a little bit about infill projects. So how does your group approach infill differently than new greenfield?
So I'm going to use a case in Chesterfield County just because I'm relatively familiar with it. And I fully understand Chesterfield and Hanover have a lot of differences. But there was there were some single family neighborhoods that were surrounding an area, and there was a small, it was vacant but small parcel that one of our developers was able to come in and redevelop, or rezone in a way that he could put some small villa type homes there, age restricted, around 2,000 square feet, first floor living. He was able to get the prices down to around $300,000. One, because of the size of the lot, because it wasn't, 100 acres. It was a small. I'm sorry, I don't have the acreage off the top of my head, but the acreage was smaller, so he was able to put, some smaller units in there. But the infrastructure was already there. The roads were put in. The sidewalks connecting the areas were put in. It was age restricted. It wasn't going to impact schools, but even if it was an area where you're not going out and having to build new schools or add capacity. So it was an enticing project because of the size and the fact that they were able to offer a product that was quote unquote affordable, depending on who you ask, but didn't have to come in and run water and sewer and make a significant amount of road improvements because it was already done, because it was in an existing relatively developed area. Does that answer your question?
Well, I think what I'm fishing for are incentives to get groups like ours to help do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've talked in this group about how to use our suburban service area more effectively.
Right.
By taking infill strategies and poking around trying to figure out what those strategies might be that would get your group on board helping do that. Maybe at some cost to everybody, but at least it also accomplishes the goal of not building and sprawling
Right.
as much as you might have to.
Right.
Okay. I mean, it's ongoing. It's moving.
Thank you. I just wondered, will this be on the website, the presentation?
we can make sure it gets put on the website. So the meeting is being recorded, so the recording will be up, but we can link all three of the presentations. If the presenters are comfortable with that, yeah, we'll link all of the presentations.
Will we be able to print off what we saw on that screen? That's.
Yes.
And if you have any trouble with it, I can print out or whatever you need from me.
I think it's good information. If we're able to print it off, it would be very helpful.
Yeah.
I think the only question I had is, how involved are the home builders, is the Home Builders Association with the, let's say, workforce or affordable housing? Do y'all promote it or?
We do. We actually have a multifamily housing council that is, they're all members of the association, but they're a group that largely focuses on multifamily development in the city of Richmond. Again, not Hanover, but to your point, we've worked very hard to have more options available to help our folks bring affordable units to the ground through working with the city on performance grant opportunities, tax rebate programs. Our state association led the effort to seek and secure legislation to create a state LIHTC, low-income housing tax credit program that would mirror the federal program, so that folks that were getting state federal LIHTC credits could also federal LIHTC credits could layer on state credits. We even tried to get, a constitutional amendment passed. The General Assembly was not successful to allow tax abatements for new construction. The way you can do that for a lot of redevelopment, so that some of our new construction, particularly in the single family side, might have that as an added incentive. We have a lot of members that's their niche. They've figured out how to work the tax credits, and they're building in markets where they can get those units on the ground. It's really, really hard from a single family side, because when you have minimum lot sizes, and this is not specific to Hanover, and you can't get that density to put those units on the ground, it's really hard to make them affordable. So we have folks that want to do it, but again, when you're coming out with 2 units per acre or 3 units per acre, and you've already got $95,000 in just development cost, it's really hard to put that affordable product on the ground.
I don't know if I've got these figures right. Okay, you said that the pre-recession was doing about 60,000 building permits a year in the state of Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's about 30,000. Okay. But we still have the same populations moving to the state, even though we have half the building permits.
That's right.
So where are those people living?
We have a lot of folks that are in multifamily rental. We have a lot of folks that are underhoused, and I think, Javon and Renee will talk about that. I don't want to tread into their area. We have a lot of folks that, we have some that are doubling up. We're seeing more multi-generational families, where we're seeing increase in interest in accessory dwelling units, so that, again, we can have multi-generational. So, there is a mismatch. Again, Javon and Renee will get into folks who may be underhoused or priced out of the market, but we definitely are, the stats are showing that we're not issuing the building permits and putting the units on the ground fast enough to keep up with population growth. But then there's also the resale side. So keep in mind, you have some people that maybe are selling and moving into, maybe we'll say, an assisted living, or moving into a rental option. So you're seeing kind of that trickle up effect through resale. So that takes into consideration some of the folks coming in.
All right, how about, and my daughter is probably a little bit older than you, has a wide variation of friends, professional, whatever. I see some of them, they don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
They want to live in an apartment.
Yes.
Because they get that phone call that they're going to make $10,000 more a year across the state line, they're going to cancel that thing, they're going to leave.
Absolutely.
Is that why you think the push for apartments is the way it is, the young people, is the way they want to live?
There is a lot of, I guess, data stories, whether it's from the Realtors Association, I know they're in the room, that are showing that yes, younger folks do like to be more mobile. They don't want to be tied down. They're starting families a little later than say, you know, I did or you did. So the need, right? They want their dog parks, and they want to be able to walk to amenities, to walk to shops, and they want to be able to say, I got a job offer in Texas, I'm going.
Right.
But a lot of them are also priced out of the market. And in some areas, rental is still a more affordable option than single family home. I mean, think about it. You pay 2 months rent as a down payment versus a 10 to 20% down payment that you're going to need to possibly secure a mortgage. So sometimes it's a numbers game with younger individuals. Sometimes it is the greater flexibility, but it's also the routine maintenance. I lived in an apartment before my husband and I bought our first home, and boy, I miss the days that we didn't have to cut grass and maintain homes. So some people just want it for the ease of maintenance.
Right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Got a couple questions if I can. Thank you. What do you define as affordable housing? What do you define as workforce housing? And I'm assuming you're applying AMI and CMI. And what types of affordable housing do you all see?
So again, your next two speakers are experts in this and will likely get far more into the weeds than I can. But you know, the traditional definition of affordable housing is that you don't spend more than 30% of your income on housing. So that's going to vary because 30% of my income may be far different than 30% of Andrew's income. And it also depends on, that's 30% of your income on housing. What if I have a lot of student loans or a lot of health expenses? So what's affordable to me may not be affordable to Andrew or vice versa. So what we do, to your point, we do kind of speak in general terms of area median income of, you know, if the area median income for a family of four is, making up numbers here, 75,000 in Hanover, you know, if we want to try to put some housing in that a family of four at that price point can afford, but that's going to fluctuate depending on what those family circumstances are. So some folks will kind of look and say, well, I think an affordable product would be around 250, 300,000, but that's still out of reach for a lot of individuals. It's very far out of reach. That's maybe someone at the 80 to 100% area median income. Where we're really lacking is where you get 80% and below. And again, I'm going to let these two folks really address that. But once you start getting around 60, 50% of the area median income, you're going to need some deep subsidy and incentive to build that, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit developer.
Thank you. Your context is home ownership. You're not talking in the context of folks renting with, some folks are not ready for home ownership for a variety of reasons.
Correct.
The context we're talking now is home ownership only, correct?
That's, yes, largely I'm speaking on single family townhome home ownership, yes.
Okay. Got two more questions, and I'll try to get this with you. Federal cost, 25%, the cost, 25% of federal, state, and local of development of property. What federal and state costs are included in that?
When I think of federal and state costs, I think a lot of your environmental regulations, a lot of things that are required by the EPA for stormwater mitigation, and to make sure that we are developing in a safe manner. There's a lot of rules and regulations around erosion sediment control, stormwater, that from what I hear from our members may be an EPA regulation passed to DEQ, passed down to Hanover, that Hanover has to enforce and collect for. So when I say that you've got your environmental side, you just have taxes in general. I mean, you have to pay if I'm going to buy your land to develop it, I'm going to have to pay transfer taxes on that. Part of that's state, part of that's, goes to the local, so there's a variety of different fees. There's building permit fees, which are very local. It's a variety of things.
Northern Virginia has a grantor's tax. I was just curious about that.
We have a grantor tax as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Final question. Thanks for y'all's indulgence. Expedited review. What do you recommend for expedited review?
So we've seen some localities as a tool to maybe encourage certain types of development, or maybe more on the affordable side. They'll say, okay, we're going to expedite your site plan review. We're gonna, versus, and I'm making up numbers here, David can maybe correct me, or Andrew, if we say that typical review process can take 6 to 8 months, and again, remember that clock is ticking. We're paying taxes on that land. We're paying interest to the bank. They may say, to move you through quicker as an added incentive, we can get your review done in 3 months. And that just shaves off a little bit of time to get that project moving a little bit quicker.
Thank you. Thanks for getting.
Thank you.
All that's thinking. Mr. Proctor?
Yes.
Oh, you didn't want to say anything? Oh, okay.
Hey, I'm Christy Proctor. Sorry I don't have my name card. I apologize for being late.
Okay.
I'm from the Cold Harbor District. I actually had a meeting with the Fed Reserve right before this one to talk about those interest rates that you're speaking of. So appreciate you being here and the great work that you guys do. To Randy's point, I'm curious if, the governor is speaking of the fact that we're losing folks to our bordering states in particular being most competitive. So perhaps that's part of the reason that we're seeing the dip in the new home builds. I know in our rural areas, that's certainly the case, and now we're seeing it in some of our more urban areas where, frankly, we're just not able to compete. So I don't know if that plays into it, but that was just something to, I guess, note. But I did have another question.
Sure.
But if you wanted to say anything to that.
No, I was just going to say the dip in some of the home sales and the lot recordations. We internally at the association have a builder's report where we look at the activity of the top 10 builders. And yes, we're starting to see a very slight decrease, a couple of communities here that maybe last quarter they sold 50 homes, now they're selling 45. But that adds up over those 10 builders. But what we noticed when we started looking at the data from, say, comparing those numbers in real time of, January of 2023, we started looking back. The numbers are looking more like what the market saw in 2018, 2019. Because, in 2020, even though we went into COVID, building industry just kind of boomed, and no one expected that. And I think a lot of it was interest rates were 3%.
Right.
So now we're starting to see the market normalize a little bit more to what we saw back in 2018, 2019. It's still healthy, but I think, some of the slowdown I do blame on housing prices, but also on the rising interest rates. People don't have the buying power. I mean, it's going up from what was 3% to now like 6.5%, 7%. If you're a first-time home buyer, that makes what you can buy, or even ready to buy. Some folks are kind of hanging tight and staying in their rentals. So I think that might be why some of the reasons we're seeing a little bit of dip.
Yeah. My question was, I appreciate you recognizing that we're not like Chesterfield and realizing that Hanover does want to maintain its rural focus. I know I was recently working with Andrew from your organization, and I was trying to find a developer who has experience working within rural areas to come speak at one of my events. And we really kind of struggled with that a little bit, because while I thought your pictures were awesome and I like the outdoor stuff, I'm just curious if that's what we're seeing in our rural areas. Are those the needs that, realizing again that's a focus for Hanover to maintain its rural character, what are the trends that you all are seeing for, I guess, for lack of a better word, development in our rural areas? Is it the same as what you were talking about today, or does it differ?
I would say probably not in the rural area. If you're out in the rural, the outside of the SSA, you probably are there because you don't want walking trails through your backyard. You probably don't want, a big community clubhouse. You're there for the more rural character. So what I was showing you is probably more of a community that you might see within your suburban service area, where people still want kind of a rural feel, but they're not in a 10-acre lot. So I would say that, to your point, no, those were not the best examples of what you would see in rural. I mean, with my experience and having grown up in a rural community and my family's still there, they're in rural for a reason. They don't want a lot around them. So I don't know that, there's a lot of trends that I could really say, out in Coal Harbor or Beaver Dam, this is what these smaller subdivisions might want, other than more trees, more buffers, from some of the main roads. But that, again, is driving up costs too, because that's less land you can develop. So Did that answer your question?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you for being here,
Mhm.
appreciate it.
Well, just one more. You mentioned expedited review, and this might be for the staff. Might administrative review of certain special exceptions and conditional use permits be a possibility?
Administrative review of a special exception in CUP, those are,
Simple stuff.
yeah, no, they're public hearings.
Yeah,
I understand
Yeah,
that, but
but,
other counties, I think, have done
I mean,
certain administrative review taken away from the
are you
legislature.
talking about like site plan review or?
I'm speaking for by right. Anything that would go through a rezoning or conditional use or special use, whatever the term used, that absolutely still has to go through the public process and can be expedited. I'm saying where maybe you could speed up the clock on by right opportunities, that land that's already zoned doesn't have to go through the longer process. I'm not encouraging, it'd be nice to have more by right opportunity, but I'm not encouraging expedited review on rezonings or CUPs, that type of thing.
Thank you.
I have one question. That 25% that comes state and local taxes you were talking about, do you know what that was, let's say 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
Not off the top of my head, but I actually have a really good report that I could give you some comparisons on, and also maybe further break down, beyond just kind of broadly saying environmental fees, building permit fees, and I can send that to Joanne and Andrew to disseminate to the group. Okay.
If possible, I'm certainly not, I certainly accept the premise of what's going on in the larger economy, but if you've got numbers that are specific to Central Virginia, that get at those first couple slides, that would be of interest as well. That would get some of the Northern Virginia noise out of there and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Javon, don't you have some more local numbers on? Javon has more local
Yeah,
stats.
that's where we're going next.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
I don't want to steal their thunder.
Can I ask you one more question?
Yes,
Conservation easement, you know much about that?
I'm not an expert, no, but I do know that is one way folks will put their land in conservation easements as a way to ensure that it stays rural in perpetuity. And I'm well aware that there's large areas of the county that have, or I should say acreage that have their land in conservation easements. It's about the level of my expertise.
One of our probably largest farmers in this county just put everything he owned in conservation easement. He worked a year to get it done. I was talking to him all the time. We had the lady come in last year, talk about it. I tried to get him to refer, but he was already involved. He had land in Caroline, Light Hanover, I believe.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly understand that desire to want to protect that property. As I mentioned to Ms. Proctor, I mean, I grew up in Powhatan. A lot of my family's still there. They fight tooth and nail to keep that rural character. But Hanover has the suburban service area for a reason. If I could leave any message with you, is to use that strategically, because it may not be today that suburban service area runs out of land, but long term, you don't want to be in a position where you have to go to that 70%. And that suburban service area is where your infrastructure, as you all well know better than I do, that's where you can handle growth. And the more strategic way that you use it, your farmers aren't going to have to worry about, conservation, because that area's folks aren't going to go out there as much, not for, denser development. And you don't need to look like your surrounding localities. You're uniquely Hanover for a reason. I brought a group of grad students here when I was in my urban and regional planning program to learn about rural economic development. And one of their presentations at the closing term, I don't know if we came up, you might remember this when we were in Powhatan, but they were trying to figure out what their region's rural character was and kind of what their motto was. And this is kind of just funny, I thought, but they said, what is our tomato? How do we be like Hanover? What is our Hanover tomato? And I just thought that was really cool that, they understood the character of Hanover and wanting to protect that. But to do that, I think you really got to use that suburban service area strategically.
Yeah.
One more short question, promise. Urban Regional Planning Program, where?
VCU.
Wilder School.
Yes, sir.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you being here and sharing with us. We know they just can't stay the whole time, so she has to
And
slip
even
out.
watch the time.
Yeah, but we really, really appreciate it. We have a round of
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for all the questions. Sorry I'm gonna miss their presentation, but I'll watch the video.
Yeah. We pushed you right to, you have 1 minute to get out the door, so thank you.
Gonna make it happen.
All right.
Questions?
Maybe you should order.
Next presentation is Partnership of Housing Affordability. Ms. Joanne Burton, did I pronounce that?
Javon.
Javon?
Yep.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you all for having me. Javon Burton with the Partnership for Housing Affordability. I'll focus a little bit more on the regional side and local side and have some Hanover statistics for you all. Our organization is a nonprofit here that covers the entire Richmond region, and we work with local governments and housing stakeholders to educate them on their housing needs in their communities, the challenges that they'll see present day and in the next 10 to 20 years. So we have a lot of demographic, population trends, and housing trends that I'll share with you today, in addition to what solutions that we can work together collaboratively in order to address some of those challenges. So this will focus on multifamily, single family, seniors in particular. We'll have a lot of information on that as well because there's a lot of implications with some of the population changes that we're seeing. So I'll get into it. First and foremost, this is what you'll be seeing today will be data that we collected in 2022. We try to collect housing data about every 3 years so that we can understand what's happening, changes in our community. A lot can happen in 3 years, as we've seen in the last 3 years with the pandemic, and so that's had tremendous implications on the acceleration of housing trends here in Richmond. So what we'll start with, and I'll just have 9 key takeaways for this presentation. What we'll start with is population change, migration in particular. The region as a whole has experienced steady migration, but the majority of that is driven by domestic migration, meaning people moving here from surrounding states and regions like Northern Virginia and DC. A big part of that is we're a much more inexpensive place to live than some of those areas. So that's been the allure, especially with remote work, where a lot of folks have decided to go somewhere that's less expensive to live and they can still have the same salaries that they have in other places. Now, what that's done to housing, though, is certainly driven up the demand, especially on the multifamily side. Just to show you an example, these are for Hanover County, population changes in the last 4 to 5 years, driven largely by domestic migration. And so what we've seen in the entire Richmond region is that increases in rent have outpaced the entire state of Virginia in the last 5 years and the region of DC. And a lot of that has to do with some of the changes that we're seeing in population, people of higher incomes moving to this area and driving up the demand for an already limited supply of multifamily housing in particular. So takeaway number 2 is that the fastest growing household type in our region continues to be seniors who are married and own their own homes. And seniors are the fastest growing age cohort by far in the region. That's consistent across the country with those that are 65 and older. This is for our region, which when I'm saying region, I'm referring to the city of Richmond, Hanover, town of Ashland, Henrico, and Chesterfield counties. So here's the change by age group that we're seeing. Obviously, senior homeowners far outpace any other group. And senior renters are not that far behind in terms of population change. And then this just shows you a little bit deeper in terms of the senior population, what's happening in Hanover County in terms of the living arrangements. So seniors living by themselves has increased significantly, in addition to seniors who are still living with their spouse or seniors who are living with other relatives. And that could be living with child, and I'll get into some of those dynamics that we're seeing a little bit later. All right, now another component to the issue of having more and more seniors above the age of 65 is the increase in individuals who have independent living difficulties, and it just makes everyday living that much more challenging. And so this is Hanover County, folks that are 75 years and over. We've seen a change of more than 300 people with independent living difficulties in Hanover over the last 4 to 5 years. So that's a pretty big jump. And just looking at the other localities, this is probably the one outlier. Other jurisdictions in the region haven't had nearly as many increases in individuals with independent living difficulties that are over 75, like Hanover has.
Do you have any idea why?
I don't know specific to Hanover.
To think about that.
Yeah.
Interesting outlier for us, yeah.
But the overwhelming trend is that seniors living by themselves who are also cost burdened are spending more than 30% of their income on housing. That has, across the region, shot up pretty starkly. Third takeaway, the running joke about millennials living at home with their parents. While funny, there's a lot of merit to it, but what we have seen in the last few years is that those millennials or younger adults have begun to live elsewhere, whether that's with a partner, with other non-relatives, which would be a roommate, for example. But still a third of all young adults in the region live with their parents. So just thinking about rising costs and making some of those economic decisions and what you can afford to live in, things like making decisions about saving up for a home, that's still very challenging for younger adults in the 18 to 34-year-old age cohort. And then in Hanover County specifically, this just shows you the change in households that have children, both homeowner households and renter households. So what we're seeing in Hanover is a significant increase in families that do not have children with them. And so I think this is a change to think about in terms of the kind of product that's been put in the ground. Probably see fewer bedrooms. That's not going to be needed as much as you have more households with fewer children. All right, takeaway number 4 goes to the income side, because a lot of times the income piece, and I'll look at both race and along the lines of renters versus homeowners and what's happened with income increases. We have seen pretty steady income increases for a lot of lower paying jobs, and it just shows you for each jurisdiction income changes by race and ethnicity. The big outlier, which you'll see especially in Chesterfield and Henrico, along the lines of multiracial groups, that's just really a census change where a lot more people in the 2020 census identified as multiracial than in previous years, where they previously identified as one race and now they've identified as multiracial. So that change is more of an outlier. But this shows you some of the differences in income increases by race and ethnicity, and then by homeowner and renter. So renter incomes still lag pretty significantly behind that of homeowners. And just thinking about, again, the ability to move up into homeownership and establish wealth creation if you're a renter, if you're paying a lot for rent, the inability to save up over time for a down payment and compete in a competitive market with limited supply. It's very difficult for a lot of renters to do so. And then takeaway number 5 is building off of the income. Despite increases in income for a lot of our wages, or a lot of our occupations, I think the basic question of does our housing match our workforce is something really important to consider. So here are the 5 most common occupations in our region, and what they make in terms of income on the left. And then when you look at those same occupations and what they can afford in terms of median rent, in every jurisdiction here in the region, you can see the pretty big gap between a lot of those occupations. So as we're adding more jobs and as we're growing the workforce that we have that makes Richmond unique, it's important to think about what that means in terms of how it's pacing with the increase in rents. As I said earlier, our region has had rent increases that have exceeded the entire state of Virginia. So this is no surprise. We also have very low vacancy rates. Other jurisdictions or other regions don't have as low vacancy rates as Richmond does, which just kind of exacerbates the issue. This shows you just graphically rent increases in each jurisdiction. You can see Hanover's very similar to the other jurisdictions here in the region, where we see pretty steady increases, but then kind of a spike as we get to 2020. This has been pretty consistent nationwide, nothing new there. And then this just shows you Hanover County in particular and what average asking rent has done. And this data is from CoStar, so the latest that we have is from late quarter 2022 or fourth quarter 2022. And here's the rental vacancy rate in Hanover County. So kind of ebbs and flows, but especially when we got to the pandemic, when there was very little movement within the housing market, eviction moratoriums and other things that were in place, we didn't see much turnover. And we're still not seeing nearly as much, and that certainly has contributed to the inability of folks to move from place to place, especially if there's year-over-year rent increases, and I think it's contributed to some of the challenges with folks staying in places like motels that have become de facto housing in certain areas. So this is a growing challenge that we have in the region, and again, is just consistent across the board. This is just showing the low vacancies in here in Hanover, but this is something that Richmond struggles with especially. All right, I'm going to move over to the home ownership side because I think that it's important to go off of Elizabeth's presentation. Here's just a snapshot of months of supply of homes that we have in the region. And if you look in 2021, 2022, more often than not, sitting at about a month worth of supply. And on top of that, here is the just increase over time since 2017 of median home sales price in Hanover County. Now, I think what we've seen is the most stark increases have been in the city, where just for an example, in 2017, the median sales price in the city of Richmond was about $210,000, which is pretty affordable for a lot of households. By 2022, it was $389,000. So they've seen the biggest increase, and I think that's probably contributed to a lot of folks that maybe are moving elsewhere in the region to the counties to try to be a little bit more competitive when it comes to home ownership. But everywhere has seen pretty significant increases in home prices. And then just shows you, I think, to someone's question around workforce housing and the ability to meet a certain price point for lower income households. This is the share of homes that were sold to people earning below 80% of the area median income. Now, for those of you who are unaware, around 80% of the area median income for a household of 3 is going to be just under $70,000. If it's a household of 4, it'd probably be around mid-70s, $75,000, $76,000. So the percentage of homes that were sold to individuals earning less than that in Hanover, you can see in 2021. Yes?
70,000 is 80% of AMI?
For a household of 4, it's going to be around $75,000, $76,000. So
80%.
yeah, that's 80%. Yeah, which is what HUD, Department of Housing and Urban Development, considers to be low income, anything at or below 80% of the area median income. So that's how they define it, and they set that every year. It goes up every year for each region in the country.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, now in terms of new homeowners and what the pandemic homeownership market in particular did is that we saw a jump in the number of younger adults who were able to move up into homeownership, which is good. This was early on in the pandemic, especially with lower interest rates. So 34 years and under, you saw an increase of newer homeowners. And it was pretty flat though for 35 to 64, and 65 and older remained pretty flat for new homeownerships. Now here's a chart that shows you kind of over the years before the pandemic. So if you just look at 2016 to 2019, you're seeing the income that was needed to afford the median home price versus what someone who was a renter was making in terms of their income. Now you can see that the maximum affordable home price in the green was much lower than sales price from 2016 to 2019. But as you get to 2020, with lower interest rates and more folks that were renters able to enter into the homeownership market. I was an example of that. My wife and I bought our house in 2021. We heard a lot of horror stories going into that about, you're going to put in 25 offers. We actually got our second offer, which is great, but kind of an anomaly. And we heard plenty of other stories of just inability to compete with all cash offers or investors or people who are willing to buy, sight unseen, and just very difficult market to try to have some sanity in and make a very important decision. So, but I think that the takeaway here is that it's going to continue to be difficult for renters in particular to gain access to home ownership with increasing costs on the development side. And this one's a little bit wonky, but basically there are a lot of apartment developments in the region and a few in Hanover that are not subsidized, but because they're older, they're built in the 1970s, they're built in the 1980s. These are market rate, but their rents have been historically pretty affordable for a lot of folks. But because of inflation, because of increases in rents in recent years, those places are starting to see some pretty significant increases, and they're becoming less affordable to the folks that have been living there. So even market rate developments that have been a little bit older and certainly less expensive because of that are starting to see some of those price increases. And there's a few examples of those properties here in Hanover that fit that criteria, that don't have any subsidies at all. They're market rate, but have historically been affordable to lower income households that are starting to see some of those increases. Or in some cases, we're starting to see investor activity where investors are buying these properties and increasing the rents pretty quickly.
What's a NOAA?
That's a very housing term. So NOAA stands for naturally occurring affordable housing. Basically, a development that doesn't have any subsidy, but is affordable because of maybe it's a little bit older or quality. Yep. All right, the last takeaway here is we have, despite all of the challenges that I've noted, we have had an increase in housing that's affordable to lower income households, workforce housing here in the past 3 years. So this shows you across the region. We added a little over 4,300 units that were affordable to lower income households, which is pretty good. But during that same time period, we actually lost about 1,600 units. And that's due to things like expiring contracts for certain developments that have converted to market rate. So our net change since January 2020 in the region has been about 2,700 affordable units. In Hanover County, you're looking at a net change of 389 since 2020 and a loss of 100 over that time. So again, we kind of look out 10, 15 years from now. The National Housing Preservation Database has a good view on this, and they can show you how many rental contracts are going to expire by 2030, by 2035 of these properties that have been affordable and serving lower income households. And once they expire, there's no guarantee that they'll remain affordable. Some of them can convert to market rate if they'd like, and we'll see some of those units come offline. So that's another dynamic to the issue. And just to show you who's most affected in Hanover County by this challenge on the rental side, you can see people that earn between 31 to 50% of the area median income. They have fewer units that are affordable to them, meaning that these are units they would have to spend over 30% of their income on. And then when you get down to extremely low income, people earning below 30% of the area median income, they have far fewer options. So you can just see the further lower you get on the income range, the more shortage of units that you're going to have. All right, and that's it. So happy to answer any questions you all have. We have tons of data, so if there's maybe things that I didn't mention that you might have questions about. Thank you for the time.
Go right ahead.
Thank you for your presentation
Yep.
and your time. So quick question, I was actually just quickly looking at your organization online.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys do any type of education for folks who, I'm thinking like budget planning, for example? I mean, I know, for example, I've had a renter who frankly made more money than I do. And if you're looking at it from the perspective of trying to qualify for a home, I'm thinking, why is he renting from me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the piece that I learned was that that was never part of how they grew up as far as the educational aspect and how to save and how you go about this process. And so it kind of just had me thinking in the sense of, or is that something that you all do, or is there an organization that we can help to promote that does that type of activity? Because I think that's also a piece of it.
Yeah, we don't as an organization, but we partner with a lot of organizations who do, and Renee can talk about that specifically. All the habitats will kind of do that as a part of their home ownership process. But organizations like Urban Hope, they do a very deep dive with folks in their budget and money management and counseling as related to rent and home ownership. And anyone who goes through, whether it's down payment assistance or home buyer education, kind of a part of that in order to get that assistance is you have to go through some of the things that you're talking about. And I know that Henrico County, their Department of Community Revitalization, they have done a lot of work on kind of educating tenants on how to be a good renter, how to, things like,
HCD, is that what you're saying?
no, Henrico's Department of Community
Oh, the
Revitalization.
county
Yep.
program. Okay.
Yep. So they've tried to provide some education and literature to residents who've called in about questions about that, on just how to talk to the landlord about simple things. If you have questions about your rent and you're unsure if you're going to be able to pay, kind of getting ahead of that, or if it's anything related to maintenance, or really just anything else. Housing Opportunities Made Equal is another great organization that does a lot of that work. So, yep, home. Yep. So there's a lot of them. Circles Ashland does some as well that we partner with. So there's quite a few in the region. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
Perfect. Thank you. That was great data.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I thank you for the presentation. It's been most helpful to me. Like what some things that happened, the way they happened, and what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of understood that anyway. But solution.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's where I'm at.
And are you? Sorry, are you? Okay.
I'm finished.
A couple questions. I'll make just a quick comment in response to one thing. They did add to the high school curriculum, probably after everyone in this room got to high school, but a financial literacy aspect to the high school curriculum. I don't know how good it is. We'll see. I got an 18-year-old. I'm hoping, right? I'm hoping he won't be one of those 1/3 that are living in my non-existent basement. But we'll see. But we'll see. Hope springs eternal, right? But getting to my question is, what is our total housing stock in Hanover? Do you have single-family homes, multi-family homes, rental properties? Is there a absolute value of that somewhere?
I'm sure that
just in terms
exists.
of Numbers?
You all probably
Yeah,
have.
we have overall housing stock and age and tenure.
Yeah,
Okay.
we actually have a report that we can send out as well.
Okay, I think that'd be very helpful. Thank you. I'm good, thank you.
Thank you.
I hit your website last night, very impressed.
Oh,
It solved my insomnia. Thank you.
Yeah.
You spoke of subsidies. What subsidies are in play? And I got a second question too. But
Yeah, so the main one when it comes to, on the multifamily side at least, and the number one way that any affordable housing gets built in the country is through the low-income housing tax credit program. That's the main program, and Elizabeth alluded to that, but that's federally funded but administered by the state. So Virginia Housing, who's our state housing finance agency, they administer that program. And there's an annual process, an application. People have to developers have to apply for it. It's competitive, so there's no guarantee that each year Richmond or Henrico or Hanover is going to get a project. You're competing with Hampton Roads and Northern Virginia and other projects, and only the best projects are going to get funded because there's limited tax credit. So that's going to be the number one form of subsidy. And then the local governments who are entitlement communities. So Hanover is not because of population, but Henrico, Chesterfield, and Richmond receive entitlement funding, which can go towards construction, development, things like home repairs and home rehabs for seniors and who have maintenance issues that they can't address on their own. So like Project Homes and Habitat have their own home repair programs to carry out some of those repairs for older housing stock. That's another example. So those are probably the most common kind of federal subsidies. And then there's down payment assistance, which can come from a whole host of different entities at state, local, and federal level.
to follow up on Ms. Adams' comment of solutions, if you had to recommend one with the shortest time horizon, the cheapest, and the most effective initiative, what would you recommend to ease the pressure of lack of affordable?
So that's a good question, big question.
I was up late last night thinking.
I mean, if I'm thinking in the context of Hanover, I think one specific one would be looking at the issue of home repairs or home rehab, particularly given the strong contingent of seniors that are within the county, because that's going to just continue to be a challenge. It's going to continue to be the fastest growing age cohort for the next decade. So it's not going anywhere. And so when you're thinking about first-time homeowner stock, and starter homes, a lot of the seniors occupy those, and they may be homes that are deteriorating in condition. Seniors are maybe not able to maintain them anymore, and so preserving those as much as you can, so that when maybe the senior decides to no longer age in place, if there are options that exist for that, then that's something that could be preserved for a first-time home buyer. I think that, another program that's been really successful here in the region is the Maggie Walker Community Land Trust, and could be worthwhile looking into expanding into Hanover. That's something that has expanded into Chesterfield and Henrico after starting in the city. So I think focusing on kind of the preservation side, home repair and rehab side would be more of a digestible endeavor than some of the multifamily side, where it's going to be incredibly expensive, and Hanover just doesn't receive the federal funding that the other jurisdictions do, which makes it a little bit tougher from a funding standpoint. And then obviously there are zoning changes that could be made to encourage different types of development. Elizabeth talked about that in terms of mixed use or even mixed income, and certain incentives like expedited permitting or parking waivers or other things that other jurisdictions have tried in order to encourage different types of development on the multifamily side.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Burton, very informative. I'll defer the rest of the time to the senator from Chicken.
Thanks again for being here. I just had 3 thoughts. Let me first talk about the incentives. One of the greatest incentives I saw was, and I have to reflect it on my daughter and son-in-law, they first bought their first home in Richmond. And I would say that was probably about 10 years ago or something like that. And it was really interesting. They bought a house that had been flipped. The incentive was they deferred the taxes for 10 years. And when you take a look at when it's their first home, and you look at it as far as how much that takes off of your monthly payment, it's significant.
Right.
And then they turned around and sold it and did very well with it on it, and now we're all green, and I'm waiting for that road to hurry up to be improved. But there are incentives, but I don't see property, and that seems like to me the driving force in Hanover. It's the cost of property, and I don't see that that's going to be changing a whole lot. But it's maybe something that from a government entity, as far as trying to work with the incentives and getting, increasing the getting builders or whatever to build here, or whatever is needed to increase the housing opportunities. Also, it seems to me that we're experiencing here in Virginia, or maybe even on the East Coast, with West Coast experience in the late 80s and 90s, where I lived in Seattle, and Seattle prices were skyrocketing because people were getting away from LA, San Francisco, et cetera, and coming up there with boatloads of money. And all of a sudden, the only reason why everything went up is because they were coming in with extra cash. So, and then just one more thing. As far as the comp plan is concerned, myself and Randy, and I think Mr. Maloney back at the last comp plan, where we saw this transition of the younger generation of where they wanted to move, come to fruition all the way back then. I mean, this hasn't changed. In fact, from what I've seen, I think it has sped up as far as don't want a big lot, don't want a big piece of property, want to rent, etc. We saw that, in 2017, and it had started before that time frame. But again, thanks. It was good information.
Yeah, and what I'll say is I was actually at an event this morning in Powhatan where it's more of an innovative project where they had a crane day to bring in a modular home, and you kind of see that, and it's 85% done. Once they put it on its foundation and raise the roof in one day, and then just kind of do the porch and other kind of ancillary things in the coming weeks. But that's something that is more specific to rural areas, and it's a lower cost product, and it's a really good product that I think could be an opportunity. So I think as you're kind of going through the comp plan process, willingness to look at some of those different housing types could be useful in the single family side. And then another big trend that's happening within our own region actually is, shopping center redevelopment and looking at things like strip mall centers that used to be very viable and now are a good opportunity for redevelopment and having mixed income, mixed use. Yep.
You know, when we talk about this affordable housing, and it always this number pops up, 2,000 square feet. Who, a husband and wife, needs 2,000 square feet? Really, I mean,
You've been married.
1,200 square feet is enough house to me. But I know our land cost is so high, that's killed it.
Well, when your kids start coming back and living with you, you're gonna need that.
They're not coming back
You
there.
might need 100 square feet shed on your front.
I'll tell you,
2,000 square feet.
1987, I went to business in 1987, I was buying lots in Hanover County, $11,500 with roads and infrastructure put in. I'm dealing with a lady right now buying 5 acres, not too far from Christie. The land's going on 150 to 200,000, no acre. Just a 5-acre lot in Black Creek. That's true, that's in 1987.
Date yourself.
Huh?
Should you date yourself?
Terrible.
Mr. Bird, that was an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Where do you get all these figures from?
So a lot of that is from the American Census, and so we got HD Advisors, a consulting firm. They're actually the ones that did the state housing study that Elizabeth referred to. But we worked with them to collect a lot of the new census data, and then HUD on kind of a periodic basis will release information about people that are cost burdened and AMI and some of those trends related to income. And then the Bureau of Labor and Statistics for common occupations and what they're making and fastest growing occupations in our region. So it's a mix.
I'm sure it takes a lot of effort to put all that together.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just looking at these figures,
Mhm.
it horrifies me for the people on fixed incomes and people that need affordable housing. Because you take the price of the housing escalating, people live on fixed incomes, their assessments and their taxes are going to be a big burden. And I don't even know how we start to talk about affordable housing, but I don't know how people will be able to afford it with what you've shown us today. That's really going to be a challenge, I think. I feel like more challenge now than I did before I walked in this room.
Yeah, and I think specific to the assessment increases, especially with folks on fixed income, that's been a big topic of conversation in a lot of places, the city of Richmond especially, because of their increases they've seen year over year, and a lot of displacement and seniors in particular being taken advantage of in some cases. So that is a big concern. Now, some cities and some regions have done things where they've kind of put a cap on if you've been living somewhere for a certain amount of time, say 15, 20 years, then you will only have to pay a certain amount despite if your taxes increase by 30%, so that they can help kind of keep some of those folks in place. Because again, if you're on fixed income, what are you going to do?
Tax assessments and people on fixed income, which that's a hard term anyway. I
Yeah.
think if you ask anybody, they're going to say it's fixed.
Mhm.
It's pretty much burnt. So anyway,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Sam, thank you.
Thank you.
For the presentation. Charlie took my question for you, which was really so what?
Mhm.
You've got all the numbers that you have, what's your recommendation to us, and what we're here to do. And I heard Enfield again, your recommendation about maintenance and upkeep within the suburban service area, perhaps maybe start looking at housing breakdowns within that area. But again, I'm looking for infill opportunities for us, so,
Yep.
okay, thanks.
Thank you. And if you all ever need any data throughout this process or again solutions, just feel free to reach out. Be happy to help out.
And again, we can get this presentation so
We can get this presentation, yeah, for everybody. Jamani, very, very impressive, so good. You can see the planning commissioner and CPT members, you can see their brains churning, so thanks for
Thank you for the opportunity.
enlightening us and
Yep.
educating us. It's a tough issue, so
Yeah.
that's why we're bringing all these experts in, because it's really hard to address this issue, but it's critical. So,
Thank you.
you.
Want me to get started?
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I was like, I walked too quickly. You're fine.
The next presentation is Hanover and King William Habitat for Humanity, and Ms. Renee Robinson.
Yes. Thank you. Thanks for having me. So I think what's really great about the ordering of these presentations is now it's like we started at the top of the funnel and now we're going to come to like hyper local view of specific homes and situations in Hanover that I think are going to be some really good examples to bring to life some of the conversation that we've been having, which is great. I'll talk about this home in a little bit. This is one of the homes that we've built here in the county. This is what a typical Habitat home looks like. I always like to show that because they've changed quite a bit. If you knew Habitat homes back 20, 30 years ago, they were all sort of a shotgun style home and had a certain look. So I always like to let folks know it's changed. I think they look like a much more modern and accommodating home. Okay, what am I not? Okay, there we go. So you saw a little bit of this. It just was a different view in what Jovan shared. But when we talk about what are homes selling for, and obviously not all new construction is put on the MLS because those are sold through subdivision or what have you, or directly through the builder. But generally, for everything that's on MLS and through Realtor, the median sales price that we're seeing in Hanover, and this was updated through January, is over $400,000. And you saw a little bit of the trend when Jovan spoke around where that was in 2017 and how much that's increased. So that is not affordable. And we'll talk a little bit about what affordable looks like, but needless to say, that has continued. So this was some sampling of homes that were for sale as of last week. And, you know, so if your median home sold price is $424,000, there is not a lot that you're going to see that's less than that, and you are certainly not seeing new construction for less than, you know, that $400,000 price mark. What you're going to see, anything less than $200,000 is either a tear down or pretty much you're going to have to do a complete renovation. This is an example. It's a less than 1,000 square foot home. It's on a pretty good sized lot out in a more rural area. I would assume if that's going to be purchased, maybe depending on how desirable the lot is, someone's probably going to come in and redevelop that and probably tear that down, and because it's a sizable lot, put something on that's much bigger that they can turn a nice profit on, to what Elizabeth shared. Homes that are in the $300,000 range, just to give you a sense of what are you purchasing if that's what you have to bring to the table, it's going to be a little bit of an older, maybe a 70s built home. This is an example of one here that's around 1,500 square feet. To Mr. Whitaker's point earlier, the size of homes has certainly increased tremendously over the past several decades. And so the older homes are where you're seeing some of those more right-sized home sizes. And so that's what you're seeing and what someone with $300,000 would be able to purchase. And I use a Habitat home that we're building here locally as the example. So we build on average, a 1,400 square foot home. We have a couple different house plans that we're building, and it's actually exactly to you spoke to. We're just trying to build a decent, durable home for folks, so we aren't dealing with profit margins, which is what Elizabeth was speaking to, which is why so many new developers have to be building these larger homes so that they can then accommodate that profit margin they're ultimately going to need to be able to hit for what they're selling that home for, to make enough money to have made it worth their while to be able to do that. So this is the difference between market rate new construction. It's one of the smaller homes that is new construction, just over 1,400 square feet, 3-bed, 2-bath. That's the same house size that we're building. It's on a very small lot, a third of an acre, so it's in a development. $451,000 is what that's listed for. We're building 3-bedroom, 2-bath because and when we talk about area median income, and I'll dive into that a little more, obviously you are outpricing the majority of folks who are in need of a home and who are renting and are either facing increasing rental prices which is a ton of what we see when your listing price is at, is at 451,000. Our average sales price is 180,000. The only way we're able to do that is because we're selling the homes that we build for less than it cost us to build them, and we can build them pretty daggone cheap compared to a developer only because we use volunteer labor. It's not cheap for land and for material, but for that labor, that's how we're able to offset some of that expense. So you heard some conversation from both Elizabeth and Jovan around people are cost burdened when they're spending more than 30% of their income on their home. And that's where you start to see people, and this is what you saw in the housing crisis back in 2008, of you're spending too much on your home, which means if something goes awry, you're gonna have to rob Peter to pay Paul somewhere in the mix. You don't have enough funds to actually be able to confidently and comfortably be able to pay the rest of your bills. An emergency comes up, you're having to make a choice of what you're gonna skip and what you're gonna pay. So for someone who's gonna buy this house on the left here, they're gonna need an income of, a total household income of over $100,000 to not be cost burdened and be in that home. That's obviously very different than what you can afford if you're buying a house that's 180,000. To some of the AMI levels that Jovan shared earlier, we're really focused on getting folks in homes who are earning 60% of that area median income and below, because there is no, to use the NOAA term, there is no naturally occurring affordable housing that is available for folks who are at those income levels. And we're working with folks who already live in the county or work in the county and want to be able to live where they've worked for quite a long time. There was a question to Elizabeth earlier, where are these people? There's not enough houses from the number, right? Where are they going? And she touched on it. We certainly see the same thing. A lot of multi-generational homes, overcrowding, where particularly some of our homeowners are single mothers with kids. Their single mothers with kids are sharing rooms in their parents' homes, so there's an overcrowding situation. Or they're in a rental that may have some substandard living conditions, or if they're in an apartment rental, the rent prices, which you saw in some of the data that was shared, has put them at a place where they can't afford to even continue to rent and be able to stay in the county that they've lived in. And where they're working. So the data, and I think this was from census, I can look at what the source was, but close to 22% of households in Hanover are cost burden. That means almost a quarter of the folks here are spending more than 30% on their housing. The reason that matters is when things start to shift, that's where you start to see things go wrong in your housing market. I always say, we offer habitat loans to folks who a bank would never offer a mortgage to. They're subprime. They're on the lowest side of the income. I've only ever had to foreclose on 2 homes. We've built 76 homes. My foreclosure rate is better than any bank you'd ever see. And the reason for that is because we don't allow people to spend more than 30% of their income on their house. We structure it that way, and we know it works. That they build that stable income and pipeline. To Ms. Proctor's point earlier, they go through a full home ownership and financial education course that includes what does it mean to have a mortgage. You're not done once you've purchased the house, right? Like, you have to plan for maintenance. Things are going to come up that you have to expect. What's your budgeting, and how do you go through that? So we know with intention it works. Without intention, people get some really great fancy houses, but when things go wrong, they go really wrong, and you start to see that effect in the market. So then when we talk about, so I talked about what the income would have to be for an average home here. You think about, certainly there's a population who, that's great. You have a lot of young professionals who are moving to a lot of these new subdivisions in the suburban service area. That's wonderful. But you also have a lot of people who are working in the county and providing the services that you need in order to bring folks to those larger homes and more expensive homes. So school teachers, the sheriff's deputies, healthcare workers, mechanics, the folks who we're partnering with to sell homes Literally, the healthcare worker is a longtime employee at one of the assisted living places up near Memorial Regional. We had a long time, over 20 years at General RV as a mechanic. We have a deputy in one of our Habitat homes because there was not going to be any other way with a stay-at-home spouse for them to be able to afford to buy a market rate home and live in the county that they're serving. So, and with inflation, we have seen increases. Jovan shared some of those numbers on income, but just to baseline you, in the county, patrol deputy starts at $53,000, 911 operator starts at $39,000. These are all annual. Animal control, $41,000. Teacher starts at $48,000. So, and that's actually a pretty big jump over what it was 3 to 4 years ago. But certainly, single income households are pretty much not able to afford to purchase homes here. So just sharing some of that to ground you. This is a nice play into what Jovan shared as one of the potential solutions, which is there's always a debate of sometimes really expensive houses are attractive to localities because you are going to get that tax revenue, right, that helps pay for some of the county services. So sometimes a meeting ground is, hey, we don't want blighted properties or properties that are going into disrepair. That's incredibly difficult to afford and keep affordable for your next buyer, because what you see developers do and flippers, they buy that home, they turn it around and sell it for, more than double what they bought it for before they flipped it. This is an example of when you offer a subsidy and when the locality can partner, what we're able to do. So this actually is an example in Ashland, where Ashland was a supporter, provided us funding from some of their ARPA dollars. We purchased an abandoned home, and it was a fire damaged home that had been abandoned for over 2 years. At the left was where we purchased it. We closed on that last October. And the picture on the right is just a recent picture. We're about halfway through our renovation on that property, so you can already start to see some of the cleanup. Obviously, the majority of the work's happening on the inside. But that's a real life example of, and we will keep that affordable. That will then be a home that we sell at an affordable price and keep that no more than 30% of their income. This came up a ton in conversation so far, which is we know the cost of land is incredible. I'm never going to win in a bidding war when I'm trying to buy land. We're a nonprofit, so I basically need cheaper than cheap to be able to do what we're doing. And even the worst lots that you would think Habitat would be the only people who would be interested in building on, because they certainly offer no infrastructure and are going to take, just are unappealing because of slope, drainage, what have you. We can't even win on those lots because that's how competitive and pricey it is for folks to get land. Jovan has seen this when he's come out to tours of our homes, which is most of the land that you can purchase at an affordable price is going to require things like an alternative septic system. The price on those systems has continued to go up tremendously. I just spent $35,000 on an alternative septic system for one we put in Doswell. And that will continue to go up. This is a picture of one that's out off Greenwood Church Road that we sold to a homeowner last year. It was about $28,000. So that's the difference just in the last year. So before we even, Elizabeth shared that graph of how much are you in just on development costs before you've even started building the home. It makes it why you're never naturally going to have affordable housing. You just can't make the numbers work unless there's some incentive or subsidy or an intentional program there. On the repair side, this came up as a suggestion from Jovan, and I couldn't agree more. I haven't seen data on 2022, but I know as of 2021, it's hard to believe because of all the development, but the majority of homes in Hanover are older, were built before 1970 versus since then. I don't know how much that's changed with the boom in development since COVID. I don't have the latest numbers on that, but I think because they're not in locations that are as dense, that's hard to remember and realize. And so part of what we're seeing and what we see in the people who are coming to us for help is as the senior population grows, there's nowhere for them to move to reasonably where they might reach an age where they naturally would have said, I don't want to maintain this home, I don't need these stairs. There's no affordable place for them to stay in the county where they've lived their whole life unless they have a considerable amount of money to be able to go and do that. And so typically your housing cycle, as Jovan said, those are going to be those homes, those older homes that your seniors are moving out of are where maybe your 60 to 80% AMI buyers are able to come in as first-time home buyers. I think one challenge that we're going to continue to have as a county is as people have no choice but to stay in their homes longer, we're starting to see that disrepair. Many folks are living on Social Security, and when repair needs come up, they don't have an option to fix that. So this is an example of an elderly woman who had a crack in her tub for years. As you can tell, this is what the floor looked like when we ripped that tub out. The subfloor was completely rotten. And to the right is what it looked like once we were able to get in there, repair the subfloor and give her a working tub. We see lots of roofs because they've been in their home for 40 plus years and the roof is long shot. A lot of internal leaks where they've sort of been able to ignore it literally until your floor gets soft. And then a lot of fall hazards with railings, porches, steps rotting. And so I think as we think about, okay, if we aren't going to have a housing option for those seniors to sell those homes and they're going to stay there, how do we make sure that that's still staying maintained housing stock so that we don't hit this cog in the wheel when they are then ready to sell it and all of a sudden the majority of those homes are in disrepair, which is going to make a 60 to 80% AMI buyer. They're not going to come in with a ton of money to be able to fix that. And so we operate a critical repairs program, as Jovan said, here in the county. That's something that we've really grown in the last 2 years. One thing that the county does have that was just mentioned before, and I don't know that a ton of seniors know this, we refer a ton to it, which is there is tax relief for low-income seniors and disabled individuals. So that could be one thing just as folks are trying to maintain their homes. A lot of people we talk to just don't know that that exists and that it is an option. So we refer a lot of folks to that. So some things I would ask of this group to think about and would love to talk about. One, I'm so heartened by this conversation happening today and clearly the level of passion and focus on affordable housing. And I think if, even the fact that we're here is progress in my mind and is a step along that way. So having some way that's called out in the comprehensive plan, and as we've said, in a way that works for Hanover, which is not going to be the way that it works necessarily somewhere else, and that's okay. What works here, but how can we include that? Affordable housing developments are treated no different than a market rate developer. So everything that you saw that Elizabeth's home builders are paying, I pay the same thing as a nonprofit. So there's no waivers, there's no reduced fees, there's no difference in timeline. I'm not saying that nonprofits should get special treatment, and it doesn't have to just be nonprofits, but I think what we just have to recognize is if we don't have some incentives or subsidies, it's not going to naturally happen, and it's going to be harder and harder. And as much as I would love to say Habitat can be the end-all be-all answer to affordable housing, the gap is so big, I will never be able to be the answer for this for the county. And so how can we think about some policy-driven ways to create some more scale so that we aren't on our own with that? I also think that, studies show mixed income housing developments are the way that is where you see the most success, right? And so what you see other localities sometimes do with some zoning ordinances is whether there's a density bonus, if a developer will earmark some of their houses for certain AMI level purchasers, then they can get a greater density. And it doesn't have to be incredible, it's just a bonus there. It's something to incent them to say, hey, we'll have tons of market rate houses. We'll have this house that maybe would sell to a lower AMI partner, and then that creates an opportunity where we can come to the table and help partner with them to actually execute that and be able to make that happen. So those are just a few things off the top of my head, but happy to answer any questions and talk further. Thank you for having me.
Very, very good presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have some questions.
Thank you.
I have a couple. Where do you look to obtain property? How do you obtain properties?
Anywhere and anyhow that I can. So obviously we operate a lot on volunteer basis. So I have a volunteer who has become an expert in scoping out which pieces of property are going to be viable, and he's spent enough time in planning that he now can sort of suss out, okay, what's going to work with setbacks and various different requirements. So we look on the open market. That is increasingly difficult because I just can't pay what houses are going for. Tax auctions, I come to every single one. Those are typically pretty competitive as well. I love when I can build in the suburban service area. I rarely get lots that come with infrastructure. It is a lottery win for me when there is water and sewer, but the prices for land with infrastructure is just so incredible. So tax options or tax sales are an option for that. And then we get creative. I just purchased a lot from a church who had an old caretaker property that they weren't using, and so we were able to get the word out that we're desperate for land. But there's no easy answer, basically.
Are you looking for multiple homes on a lot, or do you look at single lots?
Both. So the reality has been single lots have been more affordable, particularly because more of the affordable pieces of land are in the designated, or in an A1 area where it would be quite hard to subdivide them. It is much easier, and you saw this with the density analysis that Elizabeth, it was one of her earlier slides where she showed the 11 units per acre versus the 3. When I can have any sort of subdivision, I have a 5-home development. I was able to purchase some land in Ashland where I'll do a 5-home development. All of a sudden, my per lot cost is $25,000, which I can distribute that and spread that out quite a bit. So it's in my favor when it can be subdivided. It is very unlikely that I can ever win against a developer who is just as interested in land that can be subdivided. The only reason I won that land in Ashland is because, quite frankly, there's the density and what could sell in that neighborhood. A private developer would never be able to make the profit margin. It's not a place that they could put a 4,000 square foot house and sell it for $600,000. It wouldn't fit in that neighborhood. And so that's the only time that we sort of get that.
Just one more question. How do you finance the homes until you sell them?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you build what you don't build?
How do we sell them for what we sell them for? Yeah, so obviously we're a nonprofit, so we operate on donation. So we fundraise. We are able to use some of USDA's rural development programs. So it doesn't exactly align to the SSA, but in essence, all of Hanover outside the SSA is designated as rural by the Department of Agriculture. And so you can access some funding opportunities there for mortgages for those folks. So we can actually mortgage through USDA in rural areas that helps with our cycle. But we're subsidizing about it costs about $205,000 for us to build a house now. We sell it on average for $180,000. So every time we're subsidizing that through fundraising that we're able to do. And then when localities are able, I gave the Ashland example of where we received funding from them that help offset our ability to be able to purchase a renovation. I would never have been able to afford to buy that otherwise. Yeah.
Eric, before we go around, Renee, can you share with me one time you and I were talking and I asked you how many applicants you got?
Oh,
and
yes.
It was pretty shocking numbers. Could you maybe just share those?
Yes, so the last time we opened home ownership applications, we had 220 folks who were on a list waiting for us to contact them. We were accepting 4. We were basically lining up our next 4 homeowners. So that's,
Were they approved applicants?
no, so those were folks who applied, and then we only approved 4, but how many of those actually cleared, I don't know, but it's a pretty good, and we have folks who apply every single round because, you know, for whatever reason, they don't come to the top of the list when we've seen them before, but yeah, thank you.
Renee, the one you did over in Ashland, this 4 or 5 years ago.
The one that's in the picture?
4 or
Or,
5 years
oh,
ago.
the neighborhood?
Yeah, I came over there with the grandma.
Yes, Hanover
I came
Cove, just
over
outside the
3 times. It
town.
was neat.
Yep.
I did a nice job in there. It really
Thank you.
turned out beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much site work that was so incredibly expensive. Yeah, I think that was at least $1 million in site work before we did any construction or individual home expense. Yes. Yep.
Really, y'all did a great job.
Thank you.
Really, came over several times.
Yeah, we have 2 neighborhoods that we've done. So Hanover Cove is one of those. If you're out in Ashland and you veer left at the Y there at the town hall and go down, keep going down Hanover, it's Hanover Cove is the name, Hanover Cove Lane is the name of the street. You turn left, it's 6 homes. And then up off Ashcake, we have a 9-home development.
Actually,
But-
that's what I'm talking.
Okay, yeah, that's a 9-home development that was able to be subdivided. We renovated the existing home that was there and then added 8 more.
Or cul-de-sac or something.
Mm-hmm, yeah,
We have it really nice.
yeah, yeah.
I'm not real familiar with how you do it today. Do you have home buyers already identified for them, for homes that you're building, or do you build the homes and then, how does that work? How's
Yeah.
that process?
We have them identified before we start building. Different habitats can have different ways that they do that. We're typically partnering with a family for 12 to 18 months, so we have a really deep relationship with them. Part of Habitat's model is you spend at least 200 hours in sweat equity with us, so you're out working on your home and other homes that we're working on. So I always say if you come out and volunteer with us, especially on the weekend, you have a pretty good shot of meeting the homeowner. But yeah, they know when they're there, this is my home that I'm working on. So we identify that up front.
For your work, that's awesome.
Thank you.
Mr. Hager stole one of my questions, but I'm going to follow up partially with that. Ownership requirement, and part of it is 200 hours sweat equity. What other requirements, if a person or family should buy that home, do they have to own it for a certain period of time? Do they have to?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And I
So-
have a couple more after that.
Sure, yeah. So eligibility requirements with us, you have to earn at least $30,000 a year. You have to have already lived or worked in the county for at least a year. The folks we see are much beyond that. Have either most of the folks we're working with have grown up here. At a minimum, have sort of been here throughout their adult life. There's some debt to income. Elizabeth alluded to that earlier. We talk about the 30%, your payment shouldn't be more than 30% of your income, but obviously your debt to income ratio is a factor in that as well. So we make sure that they don't go over a percentage of that as well. And you have to be willing to partner and put in that sort of hands-on effort yourself. What we do is, because we're obviously selling them a home that is well below what they could then sell that house for the very next day, we put a soft second, a second lien, a second mortgage on the homes for the difference in what the house appraised for and what we've sold it for. And that ensures that, you know, they're not, this is not for them to be able to turn that around and make a profit the next day. That's slowly forgiven over 15 years. So by the end of that, they have that full equity. Something we've been exploring, you heard mention of the community land trust earlier. Habitat actually has a statewide land trust that Habitat can place any properties in. Land trusts just offer essentially permanent affordability, where you own the land underneath the home and you dictate that. You're dictating what the resale formula for that's going to be, which is you're going to cap a resale price and you're going to require that that home be sold to another less than 80% AMI buyer as well. That's one way that that's done. The way that DHCD, if they're ever giving you funds, is administering long-term affordability now is through a deed restriction which basically says the same things. You have to look at HUD's limits, and you can't sell a home for more than this, and you have to sell it to a buyer who's at this level or lower.
Are you referring to your own trust or the Maggie Walker Trust?
Maggie Walker Trust just doesn't operate in Hanover today. That's not to say that they couldn't. We just, as a habitat organization, have access to a statewide trust that Habitats that even in Hanover could put property into. But it's just another version of a land trust. It's just, and the same people who administer Maggie Walker administer that land trust as well. It's all through HD Advisors.
Have you employed that trust in Hanover?
We have not. So part of what we've been exploring is what's the best way to achieve that long-term affordability. I'm very interested in pursuing either land trust or deed restrictions. It's just what's the right step for us to be able to get there. Particularly with our buyers, sometimes the land trust can be harder for folks to understand, like I own a home, but I don't own the land under it, and how does that work? So that is a bit of work to get folks comfortable with that concept, but.
And one quick question.
Yeah.
Bird Dog and Available Properties, do you have a contact number?
Yes,
I'll talk to you afterwards.
okay,
Thank you.
perfect.
Piggybacking off of that, would the land trust make the mortgage process more difficult? Because obviously the lender, a commercial lender, or maybe, I don't know, maybe you work with a nonprofit lender in that situation, but I would think that would be a different underwriting issue, right? If there's a, well, I guess there's not really any lack of people that would to buy it, even
Right.
if it was owned a land trust, but
Right.
from a lending capacity, collateralizing that would be a little different. Isn't it?
Yeah, I can't use a market rate lender for any mortgages that I do, because if I did with 7% interest rates,
Yeah.
it's not affordable. I would have to sell a home we're already selling it for 180, which is a pretty darn
Yeah.
good price. We'd have to sell it for closer to 100 to be able to make that work with interest rates. So we internally do our own habitat mortgages, or we're going through USDA rural development mortgages.
Got it.
So in better market times, Virginia Housing, the State Housing Authority, offers wonderful products, but even with their low-income discounts, the interest rates that we're at now make it impossible.
Understood. You mentioned in passing, tax relief for seniors, helping them stay in their homes. Could you expand on that a little bit? What is that? How do you guys work with that, and what is that? If that's too far down a rabbit hole, I can talk to you later.
No, I think that's important for y'all to know. The county offers a tax relief program for low-income seniors and disabled individuals where you can have tax relief. Basically, your personal property tax on your home is waived. A lot of seniors just don't know that it exists, so they're still paying that, but they're sitting with water coming in their roof that they're catching with the pants. So what we're saying is we're going to help you get your roof fixed, but you need to be able to afford your things to maintain your homes. Did you know there's a program that you might qualify for you to be able to have that tax relief? So that's the connection that we're just referring. And we do a lot of cross-referral with different agencies in the county, whether it's the building inspector's office, if there's code violations and they're asking for us to help get a home back up to being safe for someone to live in, or social services, or the community services board. There's a lot of the DASH program, pretty much every county service. Generally, if people are in need, they're in need on more than one spectrum, so.
That's a pretty low, I was familiar with that, I was wondering if there's something else, because that's a pretty low, really shockingly low number. I think you have to be underqualified.
Yes.
And also,
You would be surprised, the majority of seniors who we're serving in our critical repair program are less than 20% AMI or less with what they're living on with Social Security.
County also offers vehicle relief too, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's been a big discussion as part of the budget with the assessments going up, so, if you've been watching any of the budget meetings, that is something that the county, is continuing to commit to, but we can get you more information on how it works and what it is, if that's something you're interested in.
The other reason that comes up too is with repairs, we require that they have current insurance. We require that they're current on their personal property taxes. We don't want to go in and invest a good chunk of money, and then their house is up for tax sale because they were delinquent on personal property. So that's how that conversation
Yeah.
sort of comes to be.
And that makes total sense, sure.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Mr. Allison? You good? Mr. Parker?
Yeah, I have one quick question. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So I know your counterpart, I think it's in James City County, they got involved in a 3D house,
Yes.
a 3D printed house.
Yes.
And so that's something that I've been sort of excited about since I've learned about it. And I know that there may be some hesitation because, you know, it's new technology, but I didn't know if that's something that you all have looked into. I was actually just looking while you were chatting, and I know I sent some stuff to Larry one time, but if you guys haven't seen these houses, they're actually pretty phenomenal. And because of the way that they make them, it reduced, you know, the cost pretty
Right.
substantially.
Mhm.
And I just looked at the price, and it looks like the one that sold on Carnation Avenue, which was in Richmond, was like around $235, but their cost to build was around $191.
Mm-hmm.
From what we were hearing earlier, perhaps it's a little cheaper to build in Hanover or King William. And I really like that we're aligning with King William in this
Mhm.
area. But I didn't know if that was something that you all have explored, or if that's something on the radar, frankly, in Hanover, because, you know, with that technology existing and the prices that we're seeing, I think that's certainly something that
Yeah.
be excited about.
Yeah, I think anything that could reduce development cost is of interest. There's a pretty tremendous upfront cost to be able to purchase those 3D printers. I think it's Greater Peninsula Habitat has that.
They're partnering with Alquist though, aren't they? So that they can reduce that price?
Yeah, and I think they had a tremendous, I think that was part of a partnership that they
Yeah.
had, but I think, I might be misremembering, but I think it was like a $400,000 piece
It's
of
very
equipment or
expensive,
something like
yeah,
that,
and
but.
I think that's what Alquist came into the picture, but that
Yeah.
was something cool to, you know,
Yep.
for both of you guys to check out.
Yeah, absolutely, you know, and it basically is doing the outside framing of your house. And then the modular home that Jovan talked about, that he was out with Powhatan, I think I've had to be educated, because again, I picture modular homes of maybe, you know, my childhood, and I think, why would we do that? We want to be able to gain equity in homes that we're building for folks. I will tell you, it's come a long way, and these factories that are building these homes are incredible, and I think really are starting to compare with stick built. And they're still going on a foundation, and then you have to do everything that's inside. But I think that 3D print, you know, it's just being able to cross that burden to be able to make that a viable option.
Would there be anything that, and I'm certainly not speaking for the county, I'm just curious as a resident, but would there be anything, you know, like that, if folks are interested in it, that could help kind of facilitate that, or?
Yeah, I think it comes down to just cost. It's cost for us to be, in that case, to be able to have that machine, to be able to do that. We've got a great roadmap with James City County, who was the first to be able to do that. They're working on 2 more now,
Yes,
which
I've
is,
heard that.
yep,
That's exciting.
pretty exciting. But yeah, I think it's just, we wouldn't on our own be able to invest in that equipment, certainly
Right.
without some help. Yeah, yeah,
Thank you for being here.
thank you.
Talk about modules, they just did one on Call Road. Big one, right before you get to Gaines Mill on the left, in that field. That's a module.
Yeah, nice.
The one
You
thing
gotta have
about,
the road system to get in there too. That's
Mhm.
the problem.
the one thing though about the 3D versus modular, which I'm also a fan of modular for those reasons, but the PSI that comes along with these 3D houses, literally they're looking at putting them on military bases because the ballistics that are surrounding them and what they can withstand. Unlike,
Mhm.
that's the one concern with the modular, obviously.
Mhm.
You know, you have high winds or you have, you know, very uncertain weather terms that can be something that's concerning, right?
Right.
With these, I mean, we're seeing reduced energy cost because the way that it's essentially concrete that is making up the exterior of the
Right.
home. So it's reducing energy costs, it's making you, you know, safer, when you have some of those unforeseen circumstances arising. But no, I agree with you, the stuff they're doing now with modular is pretty exciting.
Very good. Well, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm gonna turn it over to.
we can go ahead and let them.
Yep.
Oh, one more question.
Y'all can call and tell you.
Yes.
One more question. Do y'all use anything out of the restore in these houses?
Good question.
Because I go and see brick all the time.
Yes, I know.
I'm always taking brick stuff over there.
Good, yes. If y'all don't know,
I
y'all
was just
free to
over there last week.
restore right
Yeah, we moved to
Yeah.
Carolina last year. We're actually going to have our year anniversary at our new location on March 11th. But yeah, I basically say it's goodwill for your home. If you're getting rid of, even if you're ripping out cabinets because you're putting new ones in, doing some type of renovation, or you're just getting rid of kitchen stuff, pictures, whatever, you donate it there. Thank you so much. Keeps it out of the landfill. We sell it to the public, and I should have said, that's part of the funding. That's an internal self-sustaining fundraising arm for us that goes straight to our programs as well.
I've worked with Rick every time, y'all know.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Canoga and I've worked, but each of you move out of the district back into it, we've always
Yeah.
worked with Rick, you know, and y'all.
And to that point, so we're fortunate to have some corporate donors who give us like new appliances and things of that sort, so we're able to use those for our own Habitat homes, and then we are a distributor of custom cabinets through the resource, so we order them through ourselves, so we don't pay any markup. So most of our stuff is donated used product, but we get some corporate donated new items, and yeah, when we can use those, we do.
I've been knowing Rick a long time.
Yeah.
And Rick he got me good with 3 years ago. So he called me over there, yo, tell me we're getting ready to move. you know.
Yes.
He says, hey, man, I got some deals here. We got brand new microwaves, just came in, 2 pallets of microwaves, nice ones, stainless steel microwaves. $149. I mean, they were nice. I said, oh yeah, I'll take one of them. I take it on home. You know, I thought I would have done something. We don't have stainless steel, but he being Mr. Stupid. I carried it home, take it out and show it to my wife, and she said, oh yeah, I really want that.
Oh, you already got some right here. Keep that-
She
keep
said,
that
how
on
many
the
the rest of the appliances? Had to go in about all of you appliances. I mean, Rick every time I see him.
Yeah.
But you think,
Yeah.
good boy, but
Yeah.
that's good.
Do we have one more?
Yeah.
Yeah, you got that.
No.
I think we have enough for our, we have enough of yours for next year.
Oh.
Next year, I think we're one
Just
short on
Javon's.
bonds, yeah.
That's how you cut your expenses, Mr. Bob.
Thank you both so
Oh,
much.
thank you.
Really, really appreciate it. It's
Thank you.
great.
Thanks for the time.
So, we have one more short, just quick little update. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we'll give a quick update on where we've been over the past couple of months, and since our last meeting last month. So we spent the past couple of months looking at the first 3 focus areas: land use, economic development, and historic resources. And we held several in-person meetings, the stop and chat events, and a webinar, and many of y'all participated in those events. Overall, we had 220 people participate in those multiple events held throughout the county. We had about 25 to 30 each of the in-person events. The stop and chats, most we had about 10 people, but we were hopping at the Ashland Library. We had 30 people. We got trouble from the librarian, so there was a discussion
Told us we
there.
had to have a room next time. Yes, we couldn't be in the open environment.
So,
And those were just the people that signed in. I think some of those had larger crowds, so I do.
but we're also seeing a lot more traffic on the website and on our social media accounts. I think part of that website jump is people going to look at the resources, the draft maps, the draft documents that were at the in-person meetings are also online. So just in the past month, mid-January, mid-February, we were promoting those events. We had almost 600 unique visitors and 1,000 visits to the website, and our Facebook page is jumping as well. So it seems like people are hearing about the different documents and concepts that are being presented and checking out the website. Again, we've discussed this with you all, but these were the kind of major high-level things that we presented to the public. The suburban service area is recommended to keep its boundaries as is. One of the new land use designations is this transitional residential concept that's along the edges of the suburban service area inside the SSA, and then having some more design-based recommendations that people were able to comment on and provide their feedback on. In terms of economic development, again, we looked at the economic development zones that are in the current plan, have been around for almost 20 years, and divided those in different categories based on the specific needs of those different areas. And then historic resources, It was primarily different concepts on how to preserve historic resources as new development occurs, both on development sites and within our registered districts. So we're still getting feedback. We mentioned to participants that they can provide feedback through March 1st, either on the website or via email, or dropping off their comments here at our office. Once all those comments are compiled, we're going to identify potential changes and summarize those for public review. So we're moving on from those three topic areas. Of course, we'll keep revisiting through the process, but now we're going to turn our focus onto the next three. Rural, there's going to be a dedicated chapter on rural issues. That will be a new component of the comprehensive plan. Housing, we had this conversation today to really launch the different discussions and ideas on housing. Joanne and I are pretty intimidated by what recommendations we're to give
We
for
don't have a magic
housing.
wand, so I hope you guys have your thinking caps, and next month CPT will probably be trying to come up with some, what we think is the appropriate recommendations for Hanover.
And then active living, which really focuses on pedestrian and bicycle mobility. So we're to spend the next couple of months on that. I'll give a timeline in the next slide. But the more
That active living chapter was initially put in last second.
yeah, it was new in 2017, so it's going to be
And we're gonna build it out some more.
yeah, refinement. I think it's going to be what we've learned over the past 4 or 5 years on that. And one thing we've heard a lot more, or even more this round, is a lot of interest in pedestrian bicycle infrastructure and parks as well. So the more recent upcoming events that we're going to have a workshop on March 8th with the Board of Supervisors, where we're going to get guidance on these three issues, active living, housing, rural. And then we're going to have another round of public engagement in mid to late April, similar to what we did for those previous three topic areas, bringing out these three topic areas along with any changes that were made based on the previous round of public engagement. So again, we did land use, economic development, and historic resources, focusing on those over the past couple months. The healthy neighborhoods, active living, housing, rural, we're to focus on through April. And then we're to move to our next topic areas in late spring, early summer. And hopefully we're still on target to have a draft plan reviewed by the Planning Commission this summer with adoption hopefully in the fall. So that's where we are.
Yeah, pretty aggressive time frame, but we've been able to stick to it the last few months, so.
Will the March 8th be in here or downstairs?
It'll be here. We've been having the meetings, the workshops in here.
Thank you.
Thank you for all who attended the public outreach meetings that we had. Saw a lot of your faces there, some many times, so we appreciate all that.
And we're planning again the next round for like April. So if you're there, if you have any ideas on things you liked or didn't like about the previous round, let Joanne and I know so we can make adjustments and make it as effective as we can in that regard.
Let us know if you thought the meetings worked well, or if, it's a lot of information, so you're trying to cover concepts, but give everybody the information if they want to do that deeper dive. So we're excited to get the comments back. I think generally from conversations, people seem pretty, actually somewhat supportive, I think, of the design-based standards and some of the land use changes that, there's always going to be tweaks that have to be made, but I think overall, I think we seem to be on the right track. I hope we are.
What is the process? I recall you saying, Andrew, and Joanne, maybe that you were going to compile the comments in some form and fashion, maybe categorize them and maybe do a heat map or something of that nature around what people are thinking. Is that still something we might expect in the coming months?
So I think it depends on how many comments we get back. So that we gave everybody all that information and to March 1st. I mean, we literally are going to respond to every comment. How we do that, it may just be adding another column, like here was our recommendation, here was what they, commented, they either hated it or loved it, why, and then adding another column of whether staff has agreed with the change or is going to make the change or modify it in some way. but not knowing whether we're gonna get 80,000 comments or 80, it's hard to know what we're gonna do. But we will be able to update you with that at the next CPT meeting, after we know how many comments we've got. Andrew and I have taken the 2 days, March 2nd and 3rd, and completely have blocked off our calendars to review comments, so, yeah, so.
But yeah, at a minimum, for each round, we've been doing a summary memo that says what we did, what we heard,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing, so.
Right. So,
It's not really my deal, I don't really have this concern, but I'm wondering for Cold Harbor, Mechanicsville, I mean, it seems like there was a lot going on in the central part of the county. We went west a few times with Montpelier and Rockville and that. Are the people in the eastern portion feeling a little left out? I don't know if there was anything that way.
I think we were close enough at the Mechanicsville
Yes.
Library.
Okay.
There's just not a lot of options in the Morgantown area.
Cold Harbor was the only one that didn't have one specifically in their district, but the Mechanicsville Library is this close.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
we had a hard time thinking of a location in Cold Harbor, because we originally wanted to be one in each, but.
Old Church Community Center, but that probably would have been it, you know.
Which one?
Old Church Community Center.
Y'all all go to West Door, you go that.
That is a de facto community center.
We need to thank our loyal citizens for being here.
Yeah.
Definitely help us get the message out. We appreciate y'all.
Can I ask, I think I'm asking the exact same question that you asked. And what we're referring to, what Rob was referring to are these, you're gonna, March 1st, March 2nd and 3rd, you're gonna summarize those. Will you assign a numeric rating? It's a 1 to 5 from the,
Mhm.
are you gonna assign a numeric aggregate, average, and then push that? If a bunch of folks give it a 2, are you gonna challenge
We
that?
are going to review every comment that's submitted, but I don't know the exact process until, right? Yeah. But every comment will be reviewed, yes, I can guarantee that, so.
We had one clause, we had some stuff that we said, you're running the thing, but don't expand it.
Yeah.
So as you move to new topics, it still seems to me like if I were having to do this work, the long pole and the 10 is still getting words to paper and really getting text down from the chapters that you've already kind of gathered all this information. I assume you're working on that kind of in the background.
We presented draft text, like for the past 3, we had draft text at the meetings. So like for these, we'll have draft text by the time we go to the meetings and for people to react to the actual text.
Yeah.
So there's kind of like, we give people levels of involvement. We do a summary, and then we give them the full deal if they really want to look through the words. So hopefully by the end, we'll
And
have-
then with them having the full document, they can tell us what we got right, what we didn't get right, what we missed, and so there's that looping in of the second level of review with every topic, so, yeah.
The due date.
And sometimes it may be a third level of review, I mean, land use may need to go another third round or something, so.
The completion date is summer of next year, right?
It sounds
Thank y'all for what y'all do too. Y'all got some days and that helps you put me up in pretty impressive setups career too, you guys.
yeah, we got it down.
Thank the staff, I mean, everybody's been coming in, I know y'all will get paid for all those hours you're working, so it really means a lot.
Yeah, it really has been a whole department team effort. Everyone's been really helpful. I think helped the meetings go smoothly. I think they've learned, we've learned, so it's been a great
Yeah.
experience.
Just think we get through this and then next go around we fix what we didn't get right.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.